Every dry season between July and October, it gets hazy across the countries of Southeast Asia. Haze is an air pollution made up of soot particles, carbon dioxide, and other good stuff. The haze has long irritated and puzzled residents in the region. Irritated because it is thick and choking to breathe in. Puzzled because ending the various causes of the haze from across borders has been exceptionally challenging. In this video, we talk about Southeast Asia's long-running struggle with haze. There have been recorded incidents of haze in Singapore and other Southeast Asian countries since the 1960s. Notably, in 1961, a plane flying into Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, missed the city and had to land in Singapore because the pilots could not see through the haze. But it was not until October 1972 that the haze got serious enough to become a story. Visibility in Singapore got to as low as 1 meter, motorists had to turn on their lights in the middle of the day. Singaporeans living in high-rises reported white smoke floating in through their windows. At the start, people thought the haze came from local factories, cars, and rubbish burning. However, tests and comparisons with the industrial smoke coming from Singaporean factories confirmed that the soot came from abroad. The Singapore Meteorological Service Department theorized that the haze was coming from fires in Indonesia. Air crews flying into the country and satellite photos later confirmed that that was indeed the case. In response, the Indonesian government denied that there were fires in their lands big enough to cause the haze. Relations between the two countries at the time were sensitive. Singapore's economy depended on investment from Indonesia. In a recurring theme, the Indonesians were not always open to criticism by their very small neighbor, and with a few sovereignty disputes over some islands as well, the Singaporeans mindfully dropped it. There were further haze incidents in Singapore in 1982, 1983, and then 1991. During those times, the Singapore government downplayed the issue. It wasn't their causing, and the evidence had not been conclusive then that haze was hazardous to health, and little can be done to urge a sovereign neighbor to do something about it. Then came 1997. That year saw one of the worst-known haze incidents in the past half-century, affecting 100 million people in Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, and the Philippines. Massive forest fires in Indonesia, spurred on by dryness due to an El Niño cycle, spiraled out of control. Logged forests, peat swamps, and grasslands all caught on fire. Over 45,000 square kilometers of forests burned down. The United Nations labeled the fires as one of the most damaging on record, with total economic costs of over $9 billion. The Pollution Standards Index in Singapore, which is based on the concentration of particulate matter in the air, shot up to 226, which is classified as unhealthy. It was a record that stood for almost 20 years. Particulates in the air get lodged in the lungs and stay there for a long time. Every 10 microgram increase of particulate matter per cubic meter of air raises the number of hospital admissions and ER visits by 1%. It triggers asthma, upper respiratory illness, and eye irritations. Schools, public offices, and factories all closed because of the haze. The regional economy then was not in a good state, and the fires made it worse. The haze became a global topic, spurring conversations on their cause and what can be done to stop it. The cause of these fires are not always clear. Sometimes these fires occur as natural disasters. For instance, fires in 1982 and 1983 were fanned by unusually high temperatures, and dry conditions like those during El Niño can spontaneously cause fires too. But it is widely accepted that a significant number of these fires are deliberately set to clear land for planting crops like oil palm, often on the islands of Sumatra and the Indonesian portion of Borneo, Kalimantan. For plantation companies and small farmers alike, it is better to slash and burn the forests rather than cutting them down and leaving them to rot. It is faster, cheaper, and the left-behind ash helps fertilize the land. According to a study published by Victor Savage of the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, it costs $5 to burn down a hectare of forest. It costs $250 to do it the right way. The economics are very clearly in favor of the unhealthy choice. Fires in the peat soils are particularly tricky. They are difficult to suppress because they take place underground, and they burn for a very long time, releasing a particularly thick and carbon-rich smoke. In the case of 1997 and many other years, land clearing fires in Indonesia got out of control thanks to the dryness. They eventually spread beyond the intended plantation land into conservation areas and more. The authorities then need to scramble out to fight the fires. Indonesia's then leader, Suharto, apologized to his neighbors for the situation, acknowledging that the government did not move fast enough to stop the fires. But in largely blaming the drought, he never mentioned that the fires were deliberately set. Haze coming from fires in one country can easily affect all the others in its local neighborhood thanks to storms and global wind patterns. And it is not like Indonesia likes setting itself on fire. The haze affects them too, and they have to dedicate resources to fighting the fires. Despite this, getting to an effective solution that works across borders is naturally tricky. ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is an international organization established back in 1967 with 10 member states. It has long been seen as the second most successful regional association after the EU. ASEAN works in an interesting way, along what is called the ASEAN Way, which emphasizes quiet diplomacy, consensus decisions, and non-interference in domestic matters. As you might expect, this approach can make it difficult to get 10 different states to quickly agree on things. ASEAN had wanted a haze solution as early as 1985, when fires were first mentioned in the Agreement on Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, then again in 1990 and 1992. After 1997, ASEAN had the Regional Haze Action Plan, which asked the states to create national plans and strategies for reducing fires. It was largely ineffective. In 1999, ASEAN drew up a zero-burning policy and urged states to implement and enforce it. Yet the Singaporean government still felt these setups lacked teeth because they leniently allowed each member government to set up their own policies. The Singaporean people wanted their government to do more, and they in turn pushed for something more legally binding. Such a solution needed the agreement of the country recognized as most often the source for these haze-causing fires, Indonesia. But Indonesia is also ASEAN's largest country in terms of population, geographical size, and natural resources. They sort of march to the beat of their own drum. Other ASEAN countries like Malaysia and Singapore are wary of annoying their massive neighbor. It took a few years after the 1997 haze for the Indonesian government to get to where they felt ready to negotiate. There was the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which hit the economy very hard. It led to violence and a political crisis the following year. In May 1998, Suharto resigned the presidency, ushering in what is called the Reform Era and a transition to a constitutional democracy. And then after that, Indonesia had to resolve the issue of East Timor, the eastern half of the island of Timor in the Timor Sea. The western half is part of Indonesia. In 1974, they invaded the eastern half, brutally occupying the country for over 23 years. In 1999, the Indonesian government agreed to hold a referendum amongst the people. The East Timorese voted to separate, which caused outbreaks of mass violence. That took time to deal with as well. So it was not until 2000, 3 years after the 1997 haze, that the Indonesian government felt ready to participate in talks about haze. 4 rounds of negotiations took place from March 2001 to September 2001. Thus, in June 2002, we got the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution, or AATHP. It was the first legally binding regional agreement in the ASEAN region, using stronger language to accomplish its goal of reducing haze from land and forest fires. Actions would be enforced through the use of transboundary monitoring efforts. Countries would offer their neighbors aid for monitoring and invest money into forest fire deterrents. Malaysia was the first country to ratify the AATHP in 2002. Others, like Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, quickly followed within a year. But Indonesia, the country seen as most often responsible for the haze, held out from ratification. Indonesia already has laws that ban illegal burning, which they mention a lot. But those domestic laws suffer big loopholes and are weakly enforced to boot, which is why the need for transboundary monitoring and enforcement is so badly needed. For instance, Indonesia has banned the commercial use of fire for clearing land since 1997, but they don't restrict planting on burnt land, basically incentivizing you to do it if you can get away with it. And indeed, in order to be charged under the law, you basically have to be caught red-handed, or with comically obvious evidence like matches and jerry cans. Smart plantation owners with quote-unquote good relations with the police can easily evade such inspections. Furthermore, the country's democratization decentralized power to local fiefdoms that either were for or against the bill. Ratifying a bill like the 2002 AATHP required buy-in from all of those authorities. The Indonesian people also weren't pushing their government for the bill either. While public opinion thinks the haze has a hazard to health and a threat to tourism, it wasn't necessarily clamoring for regional diplomatic solutions like AATHP as the way to cut down on fires. This decentralized power and lack of ground roots push mean that plantations can cater to local authorities to protect themselves. Many companies had government officials on the payroll, creating large patronage networks that help them evade investigation. In the 5 years after the enactment of the 1997 law, 176 companies have been identified as violators, but only 5 of those were ever brought to court with just one conviction. The offender was fined just $10,000 for the crime. Meanwhile, massive palm oil companies like Duta Palma continue to be some of the worst practitioners of slash and burn agriculture. They are protected by the fact that oil palm is a big business, Indonesia's single largest export. Palm oil is widely used in food, health, and beauty products. Throughout the 2000s, Indonesia pushed to become the world's largest producer of palm oil. Deforestation and slash and burn has been an acceptable cost in pursuit of that goal. For over 10 years, the issue of Indonesia's non-ratification came up repeatedly in ASEAN interactions. In response, the Indonesian government raised many objections, like that sharing map data would reveal to everyone the country's natural resources, which must be kept secret, or that the public disclosure of data violated the government's freedom of information laws, or that national laws like the 2009 Law on Environmental Protection Management were sufficient in preventing future fires and international scrutiny was unnecessary. Or that local authorities were uncomfortable with having foreign authorities involved in their local governance, or that Indonesia itself was shouldering an unfair portion of the blame for these fires. Weren't many of the plantation companies based out of or had shares trading in Malaysia or Singapore? Per the region's strong norms around sovereignty and non-interference, ASEAN's members were loath to criticize one another about their international affairs. All the while, haze events repeatedly hit the region. In August 2005, haze from Indonesia hit Malaysia, the biggest event since 1997. A state of emergency was declared, and Port Klang, the world's 12th largest port, closed down. Similar haze events took place in 2006, 2009, 2010, and 2013. The events in 2006 were particularly tense when the ASEAN ministers broke the unspoken rules when they publicly urged Indonesia to ratify the agreement. That year, Singapore went to the UN General Assembly with the issue. Indonesia was very annoyed by this, and they called it a violation of sovereignty. For the next few years, the ASEAN governments decided to leave things as they were. Internally, the Indonesian government did try to do more, especially when it came to regulations on the palm oil industry. But certifications like the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil, or ISPO, often suffered interference from local power centers and fell short of expectations. The Haze event in 2013 was a really bad one, this time causing yet another international incident. This haze came from some 1,200 fires burning in Sumatra and Borneo. It was the worst haze incident since 1997. In Singapore, the PSI soared to 401, far surpassing the previous record of 226 from 1997. Responding to widespread public criticism, in July 2013, the Singaporean government became the first Southeast Asian country to enact their own haze legislation, the Transboundary Haze Pollution Act of 2014. The act establishes criminal liability for companies, both inside and outside of Singapore, contributing to haze pollution, as well as secondary liability for those condoning behaviors contributing to haze. And it also allows people to file civil lawsuits against companies whose actions cause haze if said haze damaged or hurt Singaporean people or property. Again, this is the case even if the company is based outside of Singapore. The Singaporean Act graded Singapore's neighbors, not just Indonesia but also Malaysia. It was seen as a violation of the ASEAN's norms. Indonesian ministers and the ambassador called the law a violation of their sovereignty, vowing that their citizens shall not be prosecuted under Singaporean law. Nevertheless, Singapore passing the law renewed pressure on Indonesia to ratify the 2002 AATHP. The Indonesian president Yudhoyono appeared on television in Malaysia and Singapore to apologize. Both countries were thankful for the apology, but again pressed for ratification. Internally, ordinary Indonesians and their legislators started to grow concerned about how the haze might affect their own health, living conditions, and standing within the ASEAN region. Thus, finally, in 2014, Indonesia ratified the treaty. Despite these diplomatic advances, major haze incidents have continued to hit the area. Implementation and enforcement of the laws remain difficult. Take the case of Singapore's Transboundary Haze Pollution Act. It's relatively easy to figure out whose plot is currently on fire. It has been far harder to figure out who owns that plot. For that, you need concession maps, preferably from the governments themselves. But despite initial agreements, the concession maps took a long time to be publicly released, not just Indonesia's but also Malaysia's, where the plantation company saw them as a state secret. It wasn't until 2020 that they finally came out into the public. Other efforts include civil lawsuits by residents, assisted by local NGOs, as well as financial pressures from banks or companies higher up in the palm oil supply chain. Like the work Singapore's supermarket NTUC FairPrice did in bringing palm oil from certified sources to their shelves, or big food multinationals like Nestle, Unilever, and Cargill suspending palm purchases from those companies, violating their sustainable palm oil policy. Every bit helps in light of how long it might take to get things done in ASEAN. In 2016, the countries got together and issued a statement affirming their determination to achieve a haze-free ASEAN by 2020. That has not yet been achieved. The effects of climate change are likely to make these fires stronger and more frequent in the future. Major fire incidents around the world have brought haze to cities like Los Angeles, New York City, and London. Back in Southeast Asia, hotter temperatures and more frequent dryness periods can dry up the peatlands and the forests, making them more susceptible to burning. The 10 ASEAN countries must work more closely together to adapt to these forthcoming changes. Fires happen in other countries like Malaysia, of course, but Indonesia lays at the very heart of the issue. If they don't succeed in squashing, slash, and burn, then it all falls apart, and the haze incidents will continue. They want to help fix this, of course, but it is a massive country, and resources are limited, and the country's history and domestic political situation is complex. Work continues on this ongoing haze puzzle. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the Patreon, and I'll see you guys next time.